Hey, this is Molly. I've been married to Robert for 30 years. 30. 3 decades. It doesn't feel like it when I say it out loud, but there it is. 3 kids, 3 dogs, a house with a white picket fence, and all the baggage that comes with it. We started out as that typical suburban couple, the ones who still believed in happily ever after. I was inexperienced when we got married, young, eager, unsure of what I was doing, but I thought that's what you did. You met someone, you made a commitment, and you stuck with it. No real questions asked. Our early years were the usual: dating, getting settled, buying a house, raising kids. But over time, we changed, both of us, slowly, in ways I never expected. You don't notice it at first, the quiet shifts that happen. Small moments slip by, and you think, maybe things will go back to the way they were. But they don't. I changed too. The weight that piled on after the births of our kids wasn't just about the numbers on the scale. It was about something deeper, something that felt unspoken between us. I tried diets, gyms, everything. But it wasn't until a few years ago that I really committed to it. 100 pounds gone, and for a while, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself. But Robert didn't seem to notice. In fact, he became more critical, picking apart things I didn't even care about anymore. I was learning to accept my body, but he made it clear that wasn't good enough. I tried to brush it off, but it started to wear on me. We both have our health problems. Robert's not in great shape, he never really was, but I'm not exactly thriving either. We haven't had physical intimacy in 5 years. At first, I blamed his stress, his job, his health. But when it went on for so long, I couldn't ignore it. I stopped trying. He stopped trying. We lived like roommates, sidestepping the things we used to do without a second thought. We have 3 grown children now, 28, 32, and 38. They're all on their own, leading their own lives. They come home on holidays, send cards for birthdays, and ask us for advice when they need it. We raised them well. I don't regret any of it. But now, with them gone, it's just Robert and me, and it feels empty. The house is too quiet. We don't have the same rhythm we used to. I've had to find ways to fill the silence. I've started focusing on myself, on what I need for a change. But even when I shed the weight, when I worked harder on my health, when I tried to open up again, he didn't really see me. Or worse, he didn't want to. It's like I was a shadow of who I used to be, and that bothered him. I was no longer the young, carefree woman he married, and he didn't know how to deal with that. So, he turned inward. And I turned away. It's been like this for years, but I didn't realize how much I'd gotten used to it until one afternoon, while I was house-sitting for my sister, something shifted. It was a letter. An anonymous letter, typed and folded neatly, left on the kitchen counter. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but as I read it, my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a letter. It was the truth, the kind you don't expect to stumble upon. The letter spoke of Robert's affair, a year and a half long. The details were chilling: meetings in the park, visits to the community center, phone calls that didn't make sense. The woman's name was Linda. Someone I knew. Someone he knew. She wasn't just a stranger. She was part of our world, a member of the same social circle. And she had been in it for months, maybe longer, while I was at home, thinking things were fine. The next few days dragged on in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter, its words clung to me like a weight I couldn't shake. I had no idea how to process it or even what to do next. But the truth was already set in motion, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I kept going through the motions. I went back to my house-sitting job, walked the dog, made dinner for myself, but every minute felt like I was being pulled under. The letter had shattered something in me, and I couldn't see a way to put it back together. The day after I got back home, my mind wouldn't stop. It was as if every little thing I'd missed over the years, every time Robert had been distant, every strange excuse about work, suddenly slammed into me with brutal clarity. How had I been so blind? How could I not have seen it? The unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. Something in me snapped. I needed to find more. I needed to know what he was hiding, what he'd been doing. So, I started with the phone records. There were a lot of them, more than I ever expected. 40, 50 calls a day between Robert and Linda. The more I scrolled through, the worse it got. There was no denying it now. They'd been in constant contact, and not just the occasional check-in or casual chat. These were long, frequent calls. I started connecting the dots, how Robert would disappear in the evenings or always be too tired to go out with me. The late nights spent on the phone. The trips to places I'd never been, the places I wasn't invited. Everything started to unravel, and I felt like I was falling through the cracks of our life together. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I dug deeper, messages, emails, anything I could find. I found their meetings at the community center. How often had he been going there without saying a word? All the little lies stacked up in my mind like dominoes ready to fall. I'd always trusted him. We'd been together for 30 years, after all. I never imagined something like this could happen. I could feel my heart pounding as I reviewed every scrap of evidence. I was nauseous, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn away. The truth was there, staring back at me, and I had to face it. And still, despite everything, I wasn't ready to confront him. I kept replaying the details, trying to process them. Was it really true? Could Robert, the man I had shared my life with for 3 decades, actually be capable of this? I wanted to believe I was wrong. I wanted to believe there was an explanation that didn't involve betrayal. But the longer I looked at the evidence, the more it became clear I had no choice but to accept it. The confrontation happened a week later. I'd planned it carefully, but when I showed up at his office, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. He looked at me like I was a stranger. And I felt like one. I couldn't believe the man who had been my partner was now a complete stranger to me, wrapped in lies. I had the phone records, the texts, the evidence, but all Robert did was shrug it off. He told me I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting. His voice was cold, detached. Linda's just a friend, he said, as if that excuse could erase everything else. I was still holding the phone records when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've never been good with technology. Maybe these are just mistakes. Maybe you misunderstood." He didn't even sound like he believed what he was saying. His words stung, but they didn't cut as deeply as the realization that this man, this stranger sitting across from me, didn't care. It was like he was trying to convince me that I was the one who had done something wrong. The nerve of it. I stood there, holding everything in, the anger and pain mixing with a sort of numbness. "I want you to leave," I said. And that was the hardest part. Because he just looked at me like it was no big deal. Like I wasn't the person he'd sworn to love. He didn't even try to apologize. "Maybe you should apologize for being so nosy," he muttered, walking away. That was it. The moment when it all became clear. He wasn't even going to try to fix it. Not now, not ever. I stood there in the quiet office for what felt like hours. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew something had already changed. My world had cracked open, and I couldn't ignore the fracture anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. A few days had passed since I confronted Robert, but the numbness hadn't faded. It was like living in a fog, the sharp edges of reality too much to bear. I thought I was prepared, but nothing had prepared me for how empty everything felt. I couldn't stop thinking about his words, "It's just a friendship." He said it like it was supposed to make sense, like I was the one overreacting. But I knew the truth. I had the proof in front of me, and yet, he still wouldn't face it. the days dragged on, each one a blur of half-thoughts and exhaustion. I couldn't escape the pull of my obsession. The need to check his phone records, his emails, to track every movement, it consumed me. It was like I couldn't stop. Every time I looked at him, I saw the lies, and the disgust built up in me. Then came the next step. Confronting Linda. I had to. I had to hear it from her. To look her in the eye and ask how she could do this, how she could betray our friendship, destroy our lives. But when I rang her doorbell, my heart didn't race with adrenaline or anger. Instead, it was just a slow, sick-sinking feeling, like stepping into cold water. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Linda opened the door and immediately pulled her coat tighter around her. Her face looked pale, and her eyes were tired, but I wasn't in the mood for pity. I was angry, more than I'd ever been, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to let it all out. But I stood there, barely holding it together. "Hi, Molly," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had always liked her, always thought of her as a friend. But now she stood before me, someone completely different. Someone I didn't recognize. "Don't hide me," I snapped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The air between us was thick, suffocating. "You've been sleeping with my husband." Her face reddened, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry, Molly," she said quietly. "I never meant for it to go this far." But that wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The words spilled out of me before I could stop them. "You're sorry? For what? For ruining my marriage? For tearing my family apart?" I had never seen her like this, so small, so defenseless. She wasn't the strong woman I'd always thought she was. She stood there, silent, her eyes flicking to the ground. I wanted her to say something, anything, that would make it right, but there was nothing. Just a pathetic, empty apology. As the silence stretched between us, I felt something shift inside of me. Not relief, not resolution, but a grim acceptance. This was the reality now. There was no going back. The doorbell rang. It was Robert. I hadn't expected him to show up, but there he was, standing at the door like nothing was wrong. I could see the defensive, irritated look on his face as if he was about to lecture me on respect. But I didn't care. I was done with his excuses. "Why are you here?" I demanded, standing up. "Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Did you think I wouldn't find out the truth?" He just stood there, blinking at me, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want you to find out like this, Molly," he muttered, sounding almost bored. "But this is my life, and you don't get to control it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity. The arrogance. "Your life?" I echoed, shaking my head. "What about our life? What about the years we've spent together? Do you think you can just erase all that?" He didn't answer me. Instead, he turned and walked away, not looking back. Just like that, he left. No apology. No explanation. Only the sense that, to him, this had never been a big deal. I stood there, my chest tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was like being smothered by a blanket of grief. He was gone, but the damage he'd done was still there, hanging in the air like smoke. It's been 2 weeks since Robert left for one of his business trips, though I know it's a lie. He's gone, and so much has shifted in the house. The silence feels thicker now, almost suffocating. Every corner of this place carries memories of what was and what will never be again. I don't even know where to start. I never thought I'd be here, standing on my own after 30 years of being his wife. I used to rely on him for everything. Now, the thought of independence seems both terrifying and exhilarating. But there's no turning back. I've spent the last several days piecing together a life that doesn't include Robert. It started with the job search. After 25 years of being a homemaker, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I couldn't stay stuck in this house any longer. The sense of freedom that came with being out of his shadow felt like a rush, something I hadn't experienced in years. I put out applications everywhere, retail, customer service, anything. I couldn't afford to be picky. I needed a paycheck. 2 jobs. That's what I landed. The first is at a local grocery store, cashiering during the evenings. The second is at a coffee shop, mornings. Both barely pay enough to cover half my bills, but it's a start. I don't tell Robert about the jobs. He's never supported me in my pursuit of work before, and I know he'll only criticize me for it now. There's no room for his judgment. Not anymore. I also enrolled in an educational program. A part-time course at the community college. It's just a couple of nights a week, but it feels like a small step forward. The prospect of learning something new, gaining skills, it's a spark. It's the kind of hope I haven't had in years. But even as I start to build this new life, Robert's behavior continues to shift, like a tide pulling me in and out. One moment he'll send me a text, telling me how sorry he is, that he wants to fix things, but the next, he's demanding that I stay out of his business, like none of this matters. I don't know who he is anymore. I don't even know who I am when I'm around him. I've set up a secret bank account. It feels like a lifeline, like I'm regaining some control over my life. I don't trust Robert's sporadic kindness. One day, he's offering me roses, asking if I've eaten. The next, he's belittling me for the smallest things, my appearance, the way I hold a cup, anything to make me feel small. It's exhausting. But now, my movements are my own. I bought a backup phone. I can't afford a new one, but I've learned to be resourceful. Robert doesn't know about it, and I like it that way. I'll need to be ready when I take the next step. For the first time, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction. The kids? They know. They were the first to support me, despite everything they've seen. They're all adults now, 3 of them, ages 28 to 38, and they've each told me the same thing: "It's time, Mom. You don't have to live this way." The youngest, Jason, the one with special needs, needs constant care. But even with that responsibility, even with the constant need to make sure he's okay, I can't ignore what's happening to me anymore. I'm losing myself in this house, in this marriage. I've been tracking Robert's movements, using the phone records and location data I found. He still calls Linda, every day. The calls have slowed, but there's still a pattern. He thinks I don't know. He thinks I'm blind to it. But I see it all. I see the lies. And I don't know if I can ever trust him again. It's strange, feeling this raw. This exposed. But I can't undo what's been done. I don't want to live in the shadows of his secrets anymore. I'm building something else now. A future, without him. Timing feels like a cruel joke, but it's no longer about waiting for the right moment. It's about survival now. Robert's gone for a few days, away on one of his trips, again, probably another lie. I've stopped asking questions, stopped pretending like I don't know what's really going on. But every time he leaves, it's an opportunity for me to work, to plan, to prepare. I've been meeting with divorce attorneys, one after another, gathering all the advice I can. At first, I felt completely lost. There's so much I don't know. But I'm learning. I have to. The laws, the paperwork, the deadlines, it all feels like a maze. But it's not as overwhelming as I thought. I know what I need now. I have to stay focused. The kids keep asking, "What's the plan, Mom?" They don't need the details, just the assurance that I'm doing what I need to do. They're right to be concerned. I've made strategic moves, slowly building up resources. I've saved a little, not enough, but enough to buy time. Robert's self-employed, which complicates things. Alimony isn't a simple calculation. His income fluctuates, and the business, what's left of it, is in his name. But I've been collecting the financial records. I've dug into his accounts, found the patterns, and built a solid case. His lies aren't going to cover the truth this time. I won't let them. The hardest part is watching him. He's not even pretending anymore. His moods swing wildly between what seems like kindness and cold hostility. One moment, he's apologizing, trying to get back in my good graces. The next, he's demanding things like I'm the one who's been unfaithful, like I've done something wrong. It's like he's rewriting the story, and I'm stuck in the middle. I've set a date, January 31st. The timing's right. I've got enough to hold me over, and the legal paperwork is almost ready. It's the day I've circled on the calendar. It feels like a final step, but also the first real step toward the rest of my life. Jason's care is still my priority. He's still the most vulnerable. I've been making sure his needs are met, even as I handle all this. It's harder now, doing it all by myself, but it's not impossible. I'm learning how to balance everything. I can do this. I will. I'm also finalizing plans for a new place. Somewhere we can both feel safe. Somewhere Jason can have his own space, where he's comfortable, but also where I can start over. It's small, a house in the outskirts. It'll work. I know it will. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be ours. Robert doesn't know yet. I won't tell him until the paperwork's in motion. I can't risk him messing it all up, not now. He'd make everything worse. I've seen the way he operates, twists the truth, gaslights, manipulates. It won't work on me anymore. I've learned how to see through it. And I've prepared for the fallout. I don't expect him to take this well. I expect rage. I expect more lies. But I won't back down. I can't. Not now. The kids are behind me, as much as they can be. They've all told me to do it, to get out, to move on. But it's different when you're the one carrying the weight of all the changes. I'm the one who's been holding this family together for so long, and now, I have to let go. It's terrifying. But it's also liberating. When I think about the future, it's not clear-cut. It's not a picture-perfect dream. But it's mine. And that's enough. I'll get through this, one step at a time. And when it's over, I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again, without shame.